Welcome back. Today I'll be going over chapter 21 of Ginger Alden's book, Elvis and Ginger. Elvis started his next tour on April 21st, and they would be on the road for 2 weeks. Ginger says, although occasionally Elvis mentioned feeling bloated during the tour and sometimes had eye irritation after performances, he generally seemed to be in good spirits. She says often before concerts, Elvis would ask someone to peek out at the audience and let him know what the crowd was like. She says after one show, he told her, "Man, there were some people in the first 3 rows who looked like they were sleeping. What, are they dead?" Ginger understood how much Elvis worried about pleasing his fans and tried to comfort him and said, "Elvis, it was only a couple of people. I'm sure they loved the show." How can you fall asleep at an Elvis concert? That's crazy. She says Elvis changed up his set list from show to show, responding to the audience and interacting with them. His energy sometimes varied from show to show, but he always gave everything he had to put on his the best show possible. Ginger says after a show in Milwaukee, he walked off the stage when he was blinded by a bunch of camera flashes. He fell on the stairs and sprained his ankle. She says Elvis was very angry. Back at their room after Dr. Nick wrapped his ankle and she was alone with a still angry Elvis, he told her that the bodyguards were not doing their jobs. He said a guard named Dick wasn't where he was supposed to be. And Elvis said, quote, "I'm getting rid of Dick, Joe, and a whole lot more." Ginger says there was another incident prior to this one that caused Elvis to become frustrated with some of his staff. A girl in the crowd somehow managed to break past his guards, and she intentionally scratched Elvis's hand, drawing blood. Ginger said this angered Elvis, and he vented to her after it happened. Ginger says after Elvis calmed down from the ankle incident, he told her he wanted to fly her mom and sisters out for the Duluth, Minnesota show. She knew the real reason why he wanted her mom there, though, and here she details why. Ginger says Elvis continued to ask her if her parents were still shopping for a new house. Her parents had not shopped for one at all because they felt the gift was just too much and it was awkward. She says they told her this on more than one occasion. Then a few weeks before the tour started, Ginger told Elvis her dad had moved out of their family home. She says she could tell Elvis was bothered by this news, but he was still insistent on buying her family another house. Now he was telling her, quote, "I want to talk to your mother about it. I'm going to invite her and your sisters to see some shows." Ginger says she couldn't believe he was actually thinking about her family in the middle of a tour. Terry wasn't able to make the trip, so it would be her mom and Rosemary. They picked up a brace at Graceland as Elvis had asked them to do, and then they flew out with Ricky's girlfriend on a Learjet Elvis had chartered. Before the Duluth show, Ginger's mom and Rosemary gave Elvis the ankle brace in his hotel room. When Elvis asked how their flight was, her mom told him it was good, and the pilot announced at one point they were at 47,000 feet. Ginger says Elvis was not happy to hear this and said it was dangerous to fly that high, risking popping rivets, and that he would not be using that company again. Ginger says her mother and sister joined them on the tour for a few days, and Elvis even had them ride in the limo, which pushed some staff out of their usual spots. Once, when her family was told to take the shuttle bus from the plane to the hotel, Elvis left the limo to join them, squatting in the aisle so he could chat with her mother. After a show in Chicago, Elvis wanted to talk to her mom about buying a house. So Ginger went to get her mom and Rosemary when she ran into Tom Parker entering the suite. Ginger says Parker typically traveled ahead to prepare for Elvis's shows, and she didn't know him well yet. But one day, she walked into their hotel suite and was surprised to find him in a chef's hat stirring a pot of soup on a mobile cart. So random. Ginger says, quote, "There were times when Elvis expressed displeasure with his manager, feeling the colonel chose hotels too far away from the performance venues, and all because they had better food." She said one time she and Elvis were driving to a show venue, and Elvis said, quote, "Can't the colonel find anything closer?" Ginger says another time she walked into the room after Elvis got done talking to Parker, and Elvis was in disbelief, shaking his head. Elvis had just told Parker he had a sore throat, and the only thing Parker wanted to talk about was the next tour. Back in Chicago, Ginger located her mom and sister and took them back to the suite. Parker walked out of Elvis's room after a few minutes. He was introduced to Rosemary and her mom. Then, as he walked away, quote, Elvis gave a contemptuous wave of his hand, motioning him out of the suite. Back in his room, Elvis asked Ginger's mom, Jo, what she thought was the best resolution to her marital problems. Ginger sensed the conversation would be hard for Jo, but felt it might help to talk about it. Jo told Elvis she was emotionally exhausted and believed divorce was the only solution. He asked, "Is it the best solution or the last alternative?" And Jo said, "I'm afraid it's the best solution." Ginger says Charlie came in to say Milo High was waiting at the airport to take Ginger's mom and Rosemary home before returning for Tom Parker and his flight. But Elvis was irritated by the interruption. He gave Charlie a sharp look and Charlie left. Elvis said to Jo, quote, "If there's no chance of you working things out, I'd like you to see my lawyer, Beecher Smith, when you get home, and I'd like to pay for the divorce." Ginger says they were all shocked that Elvis would want to get this involved, and Jo thanked him. Charlie knocked on the door again and reminded Elvis Milo was waiting. She says Elvis was clearly annoyed and told the girls they'd go to Ginger's room to finish the discussion. In Ginger's room, Elvis sat on her bed with Jo, and he asked if Jo would still like to look for a new house. Jo said she was happy in the current home she was in. Elvis thought for a moment and said, quote, "Mrs. Alden, I know you won't be financially able to pay for the house note and other expenses on your own. If you're happy in that house, I want to pay for it. You don't need a mortgage and your home will stay in your name." Then he told Jo he wanted to have a swimming pool installed and landscaping done. And Jo graciously thanked him. When Elvis asked what Ginger's dad would want from the divorce, Jo told him probably his share of the equity in the house. Then someone knocked on Ginger's door and it was Charlie. Before he could say a word, Elvis shouted at him, "Charlie, it's my damn plane and I'll send it when I'm damn good and ready." Charlie quickly left. Ginger says Elvis told Jo not to worry and that he would make sure that Vernon took care of everything. Then he called his jeweler, Lowell Hayes, into the room and gifted Rosemary and Jo a diamond ring each. After the tour was done, they had 2 weeks to relax in Memphis before the start of his next tour on May 20th. Ginger says one day Elvis told her he had spoken with Vernon about paying off her mom's house. Then he asked Ginger to tell her mom to call his attorney, Beecher Smith. Ginger said she would, and she thanked him. Ginger says, quote, "I appreciated his offer to pay off my mother's mortgage, knowing how much it would mean to her to have that financial burden lifted, especially now that she was facing the harsh reality of making ends meet on her own." Ginger says a few days after that, Elvis told her Vernon had filed for divorce from Dee Stanley, which surprised Ginger because she figured they were already divorced since Vernon was engaged to Sandy. Elvis said, looking irritated, quote, "My daddy used to come home from work and be tired, and Dee would have some entertainer or other people in the house." Ginger placed her hand on his back, and Elvis added, "She better leave my daddy alone." Ginger says despite all the divorces whirling around their world, she and Elvis remained strong. She says Elvis still believed in and clearly wanted to get married again. A little later, Ginger says, Elvis went rummaging through his closet and showed her an enlarged photo that was taken of him when he was very little. She says Elvis stuck out his lower lip as if pouting and said he was 2 years old in the picture and he had a peanut in his mouth. Ginger says sometimes Elvis would tell her he would take her on a ride on his motorcycle, but then they'd end up just reading or watching TV, which would leave her disappointed. She says she began to think he'd never leave the house. She says he actually rarely left the upstairs and was usually in his pajamas or something casual. Ginger says, quote, "He didn't feel comfortable going downstairs in front of strangers unless his hair was styled and he was dressed a certain way. And he was too polite to ask anyone to leave. So Elvis had effectively set up a world where he wasn't going downstairs in his own home." Ginger says Elvis had everything he needed in his upstairs area at Graceland and was used to eating in bed or at a coffee table after years on the road. She sometimes wished he spent more time downstairs or outside, but she assumed that would change eventually, and she was simply happy to be wherever he was. I get why Elvis would want to just relax at home and just be in comfortable clothes when if you're as famous as Elvis and you're performing often, why not take that break? But I get where she's coming from too. I think, she's obviously a young woman who wants to go out and do fun things. Who wants to sit at home and be a grandma when you're 20? Anyway, Ginger says that sometimes Elvis would spontaneously decided he wanted to go out, and one night he told her he wanted to show her his child home in Tupelo. She was excited to see it and hoped he wouldn't change his mind. After they spent some time reading and watching TV, Elvis stuck with the plan and told Billy Smith to get the motorcycles ready, inviting Billy and his wife Jo to join them. The four of them headed out the gates of Graceland, followed by bodyguards. They made it as far as Hernando, Mississippi before Ginger noticed Billy and Jo were no longer behind them. She told Elvis and they turned around to look for them. Elvis and Ginger found Billy and Jo on the side of the road. Jo had motor oil splattered all over her. Billy's motorcycle had developed an oil leak. Elvis told Ginger, "We'll go another time." And then they all went back to Graceland. Ginger says sadly they would not get the chance to actually go back to Tupelo before Elvis passed away. Ginger learned that Elvis enjoyed being pampered, sometimes asking her to shave him or help him by putting his socks on for him. She says her rendition of pampering him was doing nice things for him, but also doing things that were good for him. She would bring him healthy snacks like dried fruit, and sometimes Elvis would eat a little, which she called, quote, a step in the right direction. Sometimes she would ask him to play racquetball or go horseback riding, get him up and moving, but he would give her the same excuse. He didn't want to right now or was just too tired. One day she told Elvis she'd like to see the pool, something she hadn't done since meeting Elvis. And he actually said he'd show it to her. She says they walked out back and he showed her the pool. Then he walked past it and showed her what he called the meditation garden and explained he had built a few years prior. Ginger describes the garden as a, quote, lovely, peaceful place. And then they took seats by the pool to enjoy the tranquility. Elvis said to her, quote, "I'd really like to perform in Europe. Can you imagine if I went to England? I'd have to sing from a cage. I'd need more security than the president." Ginger says she had no idea that he never performed outside the United States and that it seemed impossible given how popular he was worldwide. Then Elvis said softly, quote, my daddy told me that since we met, it was the first time he saw the little boy he put overalls on back in East Tupelo. My mother always told me to marry a brown-eyed girl. She said they'd be more faithful." Ginger understood that this was Elvis's way of saying Vernon approved of their relationship, and she also mentions this was the first time Elvis really talked about Gladys with her. She told him she wished she could have met Gladys, and he told her his mom would have liked her. Then after a moment, Elvis said, quote, "I really want to have more children. I'd like us to have a little boy." Ginger says she was happy to hear Elvis wanted to have children with her as much as she wanted to have kids with him. And she replied, "A boy would be nice." She says Elvis said he liked the name Jesse for a boy, which she remembered being his twin brother's name. She asked, "How about Grace Lynn for a girl's name?" And she says he liked that name too. Then he said, quote, "When the time is right, God will let me know." I'm curious what you guys think would be great names for their kids, a boy name and a girl name. Anyway, they went back inside the house where Elvis said, "I'd like to change some things. Has your brother said anything to you about working for me?" Ginger explained to Elvis her brother Mike leaving the fire department was a huge step. Mike had 2 daughters and a pension, and such a decision would impact his entire family. Elvis told her the offer still stands and her brother would be taken care of. Ginger says Elvis could be mercurial at times. One night they were watching TV in Lisa's room when a program came on that he didn't like. Elvis left the room and came back with a gun and shot the TV. She thought, why didn't he just change the channel? Then Elvis looked at Ginger and started laughing and cursed at the program. She says he must have realized she wasn't too happy about what he just did. She says she wondered what she should do with this most recent gun incident. She says, quote, "Walking out on Elvis last time hadn't produced the desired result, so I decided to stay. If this was a test, I was hanging in there." Ginger says another time the phone in Lisa's room buzzed and disturbed Elvis, so he shot the phone. Ginger says she loved Elvis but struggled with how to get him to stop this type of behavior. Fortunately, the phone shooting incident was the last of its kind, and over time she began to feel she maybe got through to him. Ginger says she had dropped everything in her life to be with Elvis and his magical world. Now that she was getting more comfortable in their relationship, she wanted to express herself and bring her own passions into their life together, in hopes that her talents would show Elvis how deeply she cared. She says, quote, Elvis and I had read so much about numerology that I was now intrigued by the possibility of numbers correlating to certain events in our lives. I also liked the idea that certain colors or gemstones could be lucky for us. So Ginger wanted to design a necklace that incorporated their numbers and lucky stones that Elvis could wear on stage. She says Elvis loved the idea, so she began sketching a few designs that she would work on every so often at Graceland. Ginger says she asked Elvis to teach her karate, which she did, starting with basic moves, but she wanted to learn the more technical moves first. He told her she should always start at the beginning and, quote, be patient and learn. She says she wanted to get to know his family since they would one day be her family too. She says Elvis loved Dodger and she would always go with him to Dodger's room to say hello when they were leaving the house or coming back. One day when Elvis was asleep, Ginger went and knocked on Dodger's door. Dodger was sitting in her bed and invited Ginger in. Ginger said, I just wanted to say hello. And she says Dodger immediately began talking about Elvis and how proud she was of him. Dodger told her, quote, Gladys was a strong mother. She worried about Elvis. When he was small, she saw him and another little boy fighting, and Gladys ran out with the broom to chase the other boy away. Gladys even had Red West up against the wall with a kitchen knife once for saying something about Elvis. Ginger says she hadn't heard Red's name before and didn't know who he was, so she just politely nodded. Dodger told her Elvis hated fish because his mother used to cook it in the house, and he disliked the smell. Ginger says she remembers when they were on tour, she once ordered fried shrimp. The bodyguard, Sam, delivered hers and Elvis's meals and said to her, good luck eating that in front of Elvis. She says Elvis didn't say anything when they started eating, but then he asked her to prop her container top up so he couldn't see her food. Ginger says she told Sam about this later, and he said, I can't believe you ate that in front of him. Ginger says she had a pleasant time talking to Dodger, who she describes as sweet, opinionated, and funny. Ginger says Dodger told her she loved her, and the best part was Dodger seemed just as eager for Elvis and Ginger to get married and have a little boy. Ginger says Dodger said, and I'm going to quote here, Dodger said, quote, I was tired of seeing that blonde stuff come down the stairs. Did she mean Lisa? Ginger wasn't sure who Dodger was talking about. After visiting with Dodger, Ginger also visited Vernon and Patsy Gamble in their office out back. She didn't stay long, but she says it was a start to getting to know Elvis's family. That's it for chapter 21. Stay tuned for chapter 22, where Ginger talks to Elvis about his pill usage for a second time and how badly it went. And she'll also talk about how she walked into Elvis's bedroom to find him completely out of it and hooked up to an IV and how scary it was for her. I'll see you then.